Welcome back to Lex Talks, Legal Topics Simplified. Today we're going to be looking at something that sounds a little bit like it should be in like a legal thriller, like
Oh,
transferring property
okay.
to someone who hasn't even been born yet.
All right.
It's one of those things that makes you scratch your head and go, wait, is that even possible?
It is, and it's particularly relevant to you as law students in India.
Yeah.
We're diving into the fascinating world of transfers to unborn persons, a concept that kind of blends property law with a bit of futuristic thinking.
Okay, so I'm intrigued, but how can you legally give something to someone who doesn't exist yet?
Right.
It's like you're transferring property to like thin air.
You're right. The law doesn't allow property to just sort of float around in legal limbo waiting for someone to appear.
Yeah.
So that's where the Transfer of Property Act of 1882 comes in, and specifically Section 13 tackles this head on,
Okay.
providing a framework for these seemingly impossible transfers.
So what's the secret sauce? How does the act make this work?
The key is understanding that the transfer isn't direct.
Yeah, okay.
Instead, the law uses a clever mechanism called a trust.
Okay.
Imagine it like a legal time capsule.
All right.
You, as the transferor, create this trust, and it holds the property until the unborn person comes into existence.
So it's like a designated holding area, ensuring the property has a safe place to land until the intended recipient arrives.
Precisely. And to manage this trust, there's a trustee,
Okay.
a living person who acts as a caretaker, making sure that the property is well maintained and legally sound until it can be transferred to the beneficiary.
That makes sense. It's like having a responsible guardian for the property
Yes.
until the actual owner is ready to take charge.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what happens if the unborn person never actually comes into existence?
Right.
Does the property just stay in the trust forever?
That is an excellent question.
Yeah.
The Act anticipates this very scenario
Okay.
by requiring something called a prior life interest.
Okay.
Essentially, before the property can go to the unborn person, a living person has to hold it first.
Okay.
This ensures there's always a definite owner, preventing any legal ambiguity.
Ah. So it's like a chain of ownership, ensuring the property always has a legal home.
Yes.
I can see how that safeguards against things getting messy if the intended recipient never arrives.
Exactly. And there have actually been cases where transfers failed because this prior life interest wasn't properly established.
Oh, wow.
So it's a crucial element to keep in mind.
That highlights how even seemingly straightforward concepts can have these intricate legal layers.
Yes.
Now, let's say everything goes smoothly and the unborn person does come into existence. Are there any limitations on what they can receive?
Okay.
Can they just get like a small slice of the property, or does it have to be the whole thing?
The Transfer of Property Act is quite clear on this. The unborn person must receive absolute ownership of the property.
Oh,
No partial rights,
yeah.
no shared ownership. It's all or nothing.
Okay.
This ensures they receive the full benefit of the transfer.
Interesting. So it's not about granting like limited access.
Right.
It's about ensuring full ownership rights for the unborn beneficiary.
Exactly.
But I can't help but think there's always more to the story, especially when we consider India's diverse legal landscape.
Right.
We can't forget about personal laws, can we?
You're absolutely right. While the Transfer of Property Act provides this general framework, personal laws can introduce their own nuances.
Right.
For example, Muslim law, which governs a significant portion of the Indian population, has a different perspective on these transfers.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. What kind of differences are we talking about
Okay.
between the general law and Muslim law in this context?
One key difference lies in the concept of perpetuity.
Right.
This legal principle aims to prevent people from controlling property transfer too far into the future.
Right.
The Act has strict rules against perpetuity,
Okay.
ensuring property ownership doesn't get locked up indefinitely.
So the law wants to keep things moving, preventing property from being tied up in legal knots for like centuries to come.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But Muslim law, with its unique tradition of family walks,
Okay.
interacts with perpetuity differently.
Okay.
WAFs, which are essentially charitable trusts, can be designed to benefit future generations, and traditionally they're viewed as perpetual, meaning they can potentially continue indefinitely.
Wait, so we have like a potential clash here.
Yeah.
The act wants to limit how far into the future we can control the property. But Muslim law allows for these potentially perpetual waqfs.
Right.
How does that work in practice?
It's a complex issue that often requires careful legal navigation.
Yeah.
Courts generally try to balance the principles of both systems,
Right.
considering the intent of the for the purpose of the WAF and the overall legal context to reach a fair outcome.
So it's not about favoring one law over the other, but rather finding a way to harmonize these seemingly contrasting principles.
Exactly.
This highlights the importance of understanding the nuances of different legal systems, especially when personal laws intersect with, like, general property laws.
Absolutely. And to illustrate this further, let's delve into a couple of specific concepts that often come into play with transfers to unborn persons,
Okay.
both under the Transfer of Property Act and within the context of personal laws.
Perfect, because sometimes it's those specific concepts that
Yeah.
really help solidify our understanding.
Yes.
So what are we diving into next?
So let's unpack two key concepts that you'll frequently encounter in this area:
Okay.
the rule against perpetuity and the doctrine of conditional vesting.
Okay. I remember us touching on perpetuity a little bit earlier,
Yeah.
but I'd love to get a clearer grasp of how it actually works in practice, especially when we're dealing with transfers to unborn persons.
Yeah. So think of it this way.
Okay.
You can't just set up a transfer that keeps a property locked up for, say, 500 years, waiting for some distant descendant
Right.
who may never even exist.
Yeah.
That's essentially what the rule against perpetuity prevents.
Right.
It ensures that property ownership remains relatively dynamic
Okay.
and doesn't get stuck in these like endless predetermined transfers.
So it's like a safeguard against creating these legal time warps
Yes.
where property ownership is just frozen in time.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does this rule actually play out in, like, real life scenarios?
Okay, so let's imagine someone wants to transfer property to their unborn great-grandchild.
Right.
Under the rule against perpetuity, this transfer might be invalid because it's attempting to control the property's ownership too far into the future.
I see. So there's a limit
Yeah.
to how far into the future you can plan these transfers.
Exactly.
Because, like, the law is saying, let's keep things reasonable and within, like, a certain time frame.
Precisely. Of course, there are exceptions and complexities to this rule.
Right.
But the general idea is to prevent property from being tied up for eternity.
Okay, that clarifies perpetuity.
Yeah.
Now, what about this conditional vesting thing?
Yeah.
It sounds a bit like a legal obstacle course for the unborn beneficiary.
You could say that. Think
Okay.
of it as a set of conditions that must be met
Okay.
before the unborn person can actually receive the property.
Right.
It's like saying you'll inherit this property,
Okay.
but only if you fulfill these specific requirements.
So it's not just about being born.
Right.
There might be other hoops to jump through.
Exactly.
Could you give us a concrete example of how this works?
Absolutely. Imagine a will stating that an unborn child receives the property only upon reaching the age of 25
Okay.
or graduating from law school, whichever comes first.
Okay.
That's a classic example of conditional vesting.
That makes it crystal clear. So these conditions can be tied to age education or any other criteria that the transfer deems important.
Exactly. And this doctrine adds another layer of complexity,
Right.
ensuring that the transfer aligns with the original intentions
Okay.
and that the property doesn't pass prematurely.
Yeah.
It also helps prevent potential conflicts or disputes down the line.
I can see how this is getting quite intricate. But let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
We've explored the concepts now. Let's talk about the practical tools used to set up these transfers
Right.
for unborn beneficiaries. What are the common mechanisms that lawyers use?
You'll often encounter three main tools: gift deeds, wills, and trusts.
Okay.
A gift deed is a straightforward way to transfer property as a gift.
Right.
But when dealing with unborn recipients,
Yeah.
there are specific clauses and legalities to ensure its validity.
So it's not your typical, like, birthday gift situation.
Definitely not wills, as, allow individuals to plan for the distribution of their assets after they're gone.
Right.
And they can certainly include provisions for unborn beneficiaries.
Right. And trusts, those seem like the most versatile tool
Exactly.
for managing property for future generations, born or unborn.
Exactly. With a trust, you can create a comprehensive framework
Yeah.
outlining how the property should be managed, invested,
Right.
and eventually distributed to the beneficiary.
Okay.
You can even specify conditions similar to conditional vesting in a will.
This is all incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
We've gone from this, like, abstract idea of transferring property to someone who doesn't exist yet,
Right.
to understanding the specific legal mechanisms that make it all possible.
Yes, and to truly appreciate the complexities and nuances, there's no better teacher than real-life cases.
Okay.
So let's examine a few landmark cases.
Yes, let's see how these concepts actually play out in the legal arena.
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by how court decisions can clarify, and sometimes even challenge our understanding of the law.
Right.
What cases are we going to explore? All right, let's dive into these landmark cases. What have the courts said about transferring property to unborn persons?
Okay, so one prominent case that illustrates the rule against perpetuity
Okay.
is the case of Rajabajaram Bahadur Singh versus Thakaren Bakhraj Kaur.
Okay.
This case involved a transfer that tried to lock up property ownership
Right.
across several generations, way beyond what the rule allows.
So they were really pushing the boundaries of
Yeah.
how far into the future you can control property.
Right.
What did the court decide?
The court sided with the rule against perpetuity,
Okay.
and they declared the transfer invalid. They emphasized that property ownership needs to remain relatively fluid,
Right.
and it can't be bound by these overly restrictive conditions
Yeah,
that
yeah.
stretch too far into the future.
It's like the court was saying, hey, we need to balance the rights of future generations
Yeah.
with the need for property to circulate within society.
Exactly. Now, for a case that demonstrates the complexities of personal laws intersecting with the Transfer of Property Act,
Okay.
we can look at Gurjesh Dutt versus Data Din.
Mm-hmm.
This case involved a Hindu family attempting to transfer ancestral property to an unborn descendant through a will.
So we're back to that potential clash
Yeah.
between personal laws and the general principles of property transfer.
Right.
How did the court resolve this tension?
The court meticulously considered the principles of both Hindu law
Ah.
and the Transfer of Property Act.
Right.
In the end, they ruled that the transfer was invalid,
Okay.
highlighting the importance of adhering to the specific rules and limitations
Yeah.
set forth by both legal systems.
It's a powerful reminder that even with the best intentions,
Right.
you can't just disregard the legal framework.
Exactly.
Both personal and general laws have to be considered carefully when navigating these transfers.
Absolutely. And these cases are just a glimpse
Right.
into the rich body of case law
Right.
that has evolved around this concept.
Yeah.
Each case adds another layer of understanding, helping us grapple with the nuances and complexities of transferring property to someone who doesn't yet exist.
This has been incredibly enlightening.
Good?
We've explored the legal framework, we've analyzed case law,
Yeah.
and we even touched upon the ethical considerations
Right.
surrounding transfers to unborn persons.
It's been a pleasure unpacking these concepts with you.
Yes, it has.
Remember, as you progress in your legal studies,
Yeah.
the key is to approach these topics with an open mind
Right.
and a willingness to delve into the intricacies.
And for our listeners, remember that the law is more than just rules and regulations.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of our values,
Yeah.
our aspirations for the future, and our commitment to justice and fairness for all,
Yes.
even those who haven't yet entered the world.
Well said. By understanding how these seemingly abstract concepts,
Right.
like transfers to unborn persons, operate within the legal system, you gain a deeper appreciation for the power and complexity of the law.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into transfers to unborn persons.
It was my pleasure.
Make sure to subscribe to Lex Talks for more deep dives on fascinating legal topics.
Yes.
Until next time, keep those legal minds sharp.